Okay. Everybody see my screen okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So welcome everybody to our second community call of the month. Before I let Barbara take it away, I'm just going to give folks the reminder that we do have shared community notes as an open pad document. The short link for that and the QR code are available on that slide. If you could go ahead and hop in there and add your and a little bit of info about yourself, where you're coming from, what you do, whatever you want to list on that document to help us record who has attended, that'd be great. And also that's a spot for you to enter in any questions that should arise either while Lynn or James are speaking or while Barbara is sharing some of the community announcements. All right, I think I'll just go right into the updates for Barbara. There you go. All right, take it away, Barbara.
My turn. Hello, everybody. I'm delighted not to be hosting for once. I get to go and say my part and then move on. So I'll be giving some updates about the work that the Internet of Production Alliance or some of its membership is up to since the last call. However, the last call was just a couple of weeks ago. So what I'll do instead is get in a little bit more detail about some of those. There's one big news for which there's a lot more information in the notes, actually, which is that as part of our collaboration with the MAKE project, we have a survey that has just gone out, or more precisely, 2 surveys going out. And one of the surveys is for makers to fill in, and the other is for maker spaces to fill in. Both of these surveys are meant to provide a lot of information for the work that's being done around the people and skills standard and research, and around the mapping of manufacturing locations. So this is very much a call to action, both for you to fill it in if you are in under either of these categories, and to share it quite widely. Information on that will be in the newsletter, or is in the newsletter that you received today. I hope you've received today's newsletter. So you feel free to just forward that if that's the easiest way to do it, and saying, hey, there's a survey to fill out. The more data we have, just the more we have to work with at this research and development phase for the people and skills standard, and the more data we can get on the map of manufacturing locations. In addition to that, still under the people and skills standards, for those of you who might not be aware of it, we are on a 9-month progress towards developing a standard around people and skill, or perhaps the first of several standards. And a beta version of the data standard will be out mid-March, and between mid-March and May, I believe, there will be a call for participation to work on it. And we're looking to put together a team, not necessarily of very many people, but a team of people that can come together to actually work on the document, possibly as co-authors working with Sarah. So this is a call of, of participation. It's not just come and join a few calls. It's like, this topic is something you actually want to put some work and time in. We have some budget as well to enable you to come on the author group. So please do reach out to Sarah if you would like to participate in that. We are working within the RISA project that you might have heard of, which will enable us to work on indicators for the impact of maker spaces, amongst other things, and as well as test out some of the tools that we will have created and make. And for example, test out the distributed contracting system that will have been created. It will be able to be rolled out in 9 maker spaces. And this is what the slide says about the announcement of site selection today. Drum roll. The 9 locations that will receive funding to run some of the parts of the program will be announced today. So look forward to that information. And where is this going to be announced, Sarah? Is it the newsletter, or is it on the forum?
Yeah, I mean, they'll be getting announced more broadly in the next couple of days. The site selection is being finalized today, and the recipients all applicants will be contacted today. And so it'll be a couple of days delay before the announcement comes out.
Great. We're going to get a lot of support over the next months from an incubator program of the Code for Society, a group network. It's a very big focus on governance. For anybody who's been part of the governance task force, we haven't waited for this to get started, but this is going to enable us to actually fund all the time that we're spending on this, and put us in a cohort of other organizations that are going through similar processes of figuring out how their community functions, what their charter might be, what their governance structure might be, and we'll have their peer-to-peer expertise as well as external experts to support us. So we're really looking forward to that. And finally, the second round of the Open Nowhere Manufacturing Awards are being reviewed. The applications are being reviewed, and the announcements will be out in a couple of weeks. And then coming up this week, actually, for the Alliance, if you're not planning to be in Hamburg, maybe you should. There's a lot of events happening in Hamburg. The good news is some of them are remote. I've put a lot of information in the pad, including the links on how to register to some of these events. So head there for more information than what I'm just about to say right now. There are 3 events, actually 4 events happening back to back in Hamburg. Tomorrow and the day after, the Fab City Foundation is bringing together a whole ecosystem of partners to work on a declaration for the digital ecosystem. So it's work sessions around aligning values, mapping the ecosystem, and actually coming up with a declaration. On the 3rd and the 4th, there is a conference, which I believe is only on site, but there might be an online version, I'm not sure, where City Hamburg is reporting back on the work that they've done with the Interfacer project, which has the aspiration to be an operating system for Fab cities around the world, or that Fab cities around the world could use. So all the various systems that you might need for local manufacturing. And then we, the Internet of Production Alliance, are bringing together some of our members and some of our partners for a series of workshops for a one-day meetup on the Sunday. Some of that might be remote, so if you're interested in participating in that, reach out to me and I will keep you in mind as we finalize the program. It's not finalized yet because it will depend on the results of the previous 4 days. And then there's a bullet point missing, which is that on the 6th, the Opal Toolchain Foundation is hosting a series of hackathons that Sarah maybe can say more about, because I'm not quite sure what's going on there.
I think Robin Vabruba might be the best one.
If his audio works.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Robin? Ah, darn.
I'm sorry.
It will be a time for folks from the Open Toolchain Foundation to get together. I believe that a lot of this work is going to be focusing on documentation, if I'm not mistaken. And it's only about, I think it's within very close walking distance of the design center, so it's an easy commute from the main event. So yeah, I encourage folks that you feel free to reach out to me. I could forward the email with more information on it if you're interested. And also, you could talk with Robin about it because he was the one that got me apprised and involved in it. So
I think that was all for our updates, I believe, unless there's a surprise slide that I haven't heard about coming up. So I'm handing over the microphone maybe directly to Lynn, who I believe is our first speaker. Yes. Lynn, I'm really excited to hear about what you're going to talk about because I knew that this was coming up. Therefore, I've just been waiting to actually get the real information from the source rather than actually listening to what the team has been saying about what you do.
Thank you. My pleasure. It's great to be here. So this is about ValueFlows and its relationship with OKH, Lush. Next slide. So ValueFlows is a standard vocabulary. It describes flows of economic resources of all kinds within distributed economic ecosystems. Its purpose is to enable internetworking among many different software applications, which are used by all kinds of different economic groups and organizations. So it's broader than you, but we'll see the interconnections coming up real fast here. Examples: value networks, supply chains, joint ventures, et cetera, as well as individual groups and organizations. ValueFlows supports 2 kinds of economic activity. One is exchanging and transfer, which I won't go into much today at all, although that, it's sort of applicable around the edges. And the other one, which is more important today, is production and making stuff. So that's you guys, all kinds of manufacturing, supply chains. Also distribution encompasses things plus services plus knowledge works, documents, designs, etc. Next. So ValueFlows and OKH, they are similarly expressed as RDF specifications. They are both committed to open knowledge. And they are very complementary, having two areas of overlap. One is that most of what's in OKH or OKH Losh, I don't know which is the right way to say it to you all, are considered economic resources in ValueFlows. So all the designs, any parts, any pieces of documentation that y'all have, which is quite a few, all of those are economic resources. The other piece is sort of a different slant. So the bill of materials that you have and maker instructions and anything else, I think there's a few places that you have information about how to make the thing. So all of that stuff is roughly equivalent to a ValueFlows recipe, we call it. And I'll show you more about that in a minute. I wanted to note, and you brought this up a little bit already, that both ValueFlows and OKH are being used in this Fab City project coming out of Fab City Hamburg. They make use of that first overlap, and I saw the code, it's true. So they're crawling the OKH Losh data, they're pulling that in and saving it as ValueFlows economic resources in the Fab City OS database. They are not making use of the second overlap, but they could someday. But they aren't doing planning. They aren't doing the recipes and planning. Okay. Here's something to try to make it a little more concrete. Here's a potential maker workflow. We're up in OKH. Designers are creating things, creating designs and other artifacts that will be useful to makers, which can be done collaboratively. And that Fab City has ways to kind of do that. People to say, hey, I want to add to your design. And the designer to say, okay, or no, not really. But anyway, lots of forking and merging can go on. Designers and makers can discover open designs. That's you guys. And then we start to get where there could be overlap. So ValueFlows recipes can be created from designs and MakerDoc. And we took a look at the MakerDoc that the Fab City folks are doing. And we think we can make a recipe from, they've added metadata into FreeCAD designs basically, and then pulling it out into a kind of markdown thing that'll make very pretty maker documentation. So that's where the touch point can be. And I'll say one more thing about that at the end of this slide, but then once there's a recipe in ValueFlows, you can create a plan from that recipe, which can be distributed for distributed manufacturing. Then the makers will use that design and documentation and plan to create something. And if they document what all they did and who all helped and what they used, etc., including the design, they can credit the design and any other contributions, then that data can be used down the line for all kinds of stuff. If the maker sells this final product and gets paid for it, then the maker can use that flow data to discover all the contributors and reward everybody kind of according to their previous agreements. And then I wanted to mention that you can skip steps here, I think. I haven't tried it. But I think that from the OKH documentation, instead of creating a recipe, you could also just directly create the plan and possibly also directly sort of feed helpful information to the makers to document what they're doing. You know, like here's what this design says you're going to do. You're going to do this. You're going to use these parts, you're going to use these tools. Did you do that? You know, yes. So anyway, that's a potential workflow to help us to think about it. Next, here's a little picture. So the piece in the middle with the yellow, red, and green is a very simplistic view of ValueFlows, and it has 3 layers. It has what we call a knowledge layer. That's kind of it could be called a type layer or like a policy layer, or that's what you would use if you were going to configure your group to use ValueFlows in certain ways. And the recipe lives there. in addition to the types of various things. Then the plan layer is kind of what it says, and there's a bunch more stuff in there than you see. But you can say, this is what I want to do, and hey, can you come and help me? Or this is what I want to do, and I know our group knows who's going to do what on this plan. So, we can have some dates and some people attached and stuff like that. And then the observation layer is for logging what actually happened. I did this. Whoops, I used a few more parts than I planned. This is what I created. This is how long it took me, kind of whatever information you need. So that's ValueFlows, the two-second version of ValueFlows. And then the two squares are the two areas of potential kind of touch points and a little bit of overlap with the OKH models. The one on the lower left is the one that I sort of listed first above, where the main pieces, the modules and parts, software that are components in OKH, but also all of those five, the bill of materials, the README, et cetera, all of those could appear in ValueFlows as economic resources. The resource specification is like the types, and the resource is something that actually exists. So somewhere where in that range is a connection. And that's the one that Fab City actually is doing. So all of that stuff that comes over from OKLosh, when they scrape it, gets saved as economic resources, as part of an economic resource. So, and then the other square is the second part that is not done in Fab City, where the recipe that makes something that is of this resource specification, or that's the same as a resource type, has approximately the same information as the bill of materials and whatever manufacturing instructions exist. The recipe combines that into its own data structure instead of having it separate. So there's a little bit of thought to go into there for how to link those things if in fact we want to. But anyway, it's a lot of the same information right there. Okay. So this is a little bit more detail about how the ValueFlows model basically works. And this says the ValueFlows recipe because that's what we care about for you guys, but it's actually the same basic pattern on each of those three layers, which can then kind of generate each other and connect to each other. So the yellow things that we call processes, those could be something like steps, perhaps in MakerDoc, or they could be a page in the MakerDoc. In some way they are, and they could each be an OKH-Losh thing too. If you're making a component and then you're making another component and then you're assembling those components together, those might be separate processes in ValueFlow. So here's the pie example, our favorite one. The arrows going in and out of processes are the inputs and outputs. And the whole thing works on this input process output model where outputs of a process can become inputs to another process. And this is sort of shows a very sequential thing, but it could be less sequential than that. For example, if you made dough in the morning and maybe you're going to use that for apple pies, but you're also going to use it for blueberry pies today, and maybe next month you can freeze it and you're going to use it for some other apple pie, then you would be producing this dough, but you would see that dough then consumed in lots of other processes. And the same thing works on the other end. You can have more than one output, sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident. Like if you bake those pies and dropped one, now that goes into the compost pile, and you'd have two separate outputs because they're different kinds of resources then at that point. And then the resources are kind of what holds it all together. Processes and the resources, and then you got flows in between. So, okay, next. This is the backwards look, just to show how things, this is a minimal view because as you saw, a lot more stuff went into the pies than is shown on this view, but you can get to all of that by going backwards. And some extra stuff is shown here too, which is you didn't see on the last slide. But here's a customer in a restaurant saying, wow, this is great pie. Where'd they get their apples? So you should, with this data structure, be able to trace this backwards. Okay, it got delivered by this guy with his truck. Before that, it got, baked and filled, and the dough was made and all the things that are missing. And the baker got these apples from this organic orchard at the far right. And in fact, you could go farther, this thing will go as far back as you have data for. So you can say, okay, well, that orchard employs workers, and are they treating them fairly? Yes, it is organic. Here's the inputs they use for their trees, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, if you sort of imagine that could be some sort of maker project, you should be able to go back and say, these are people who helped. These are people who made parts that we used. These are people that, this is equipment that we used, et cetera, et cetera. So, and you can do that forwards or backwards. So that might be it. Next. Yep, that's it.
Okay, thank you
Questions? Yeah.
so much. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so people can see your face. There you go. And yeah, sorry to cut you off, Lynn. As she said,
No, that's
questions.
okay.
I have a question.
Yeah,
Which
okay.
is, do you have an example of it being put in practice in terms of what that ends up like in terms of user interface, like people inputting this data? I'm sure it's been applied differently by the different users, but is there one that you may be able to access and share at some point, maybe not off the top of your head?
Yeah, there are several projects sort of pre-creating value flows that were inputs to value flows, as well as projects from other people. This isn't just like our thing. we're stewarding it at the moment because we're in the process of a lot of projects going forward. And Sensorica might be one. There's one that comes to mind because you guys will probably be familiar, and it's the same kind of data. So yeah, Bob and I wrote their application way back, starting maybe in 2012. And you could see all of this happening there. So I can send some links maybe to documentation, or you can go look at it. They're very open, so you can see everything they've got. And they do have recipes, and they do make plans, and they do log what they do, especially when they think they're going to be able to get paid for it. Oh, Tibby is here. Okay. Hey, Tibby. You want to say 2 words?
Well, I just wrapped up I just wrapped up one assignment with the IOPA, and I am going to deliver the data from the DRP who contributed that. So everything is going to become more tangible.
Yeah. So that application still runs, but just barely. It's so old. And we're looking to make a new one. The Fab City OS, like I said earlier, uses value flows, and they probably this next week you could see demos of their screens because I'm pretty sure they're ready to do that. And there are other there's one other Fab project that uses value flows, which is a high school Fab Lab network in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, near us. And so that would be another thing you could see some of. They're sort of in process, but they take in donations from the corporations in the community of materials, and then they share them between the Fab Labs in the various schools. And kids use them to make stuff, and then the corporations can say, oh, look, this stuff I donated got used by all these kids. This is what they made. And there are other examples that aren't Fab related. So that, I don't know. It's sort of an odd time because we went through a really heavy ValueFlows, like we don't feel like we're at the 1.0 stable release yet. The core of ValueFlows is quite stable, but there's a bunch of stuff around the edges that is not quite so stable. Like, for example, figuring out how this OKF ValueFlows thing might work and how that affects how we should model our recipes. So we've for a few years now been sort of pulled back on active ValueFlows development, addressing things as they come up in these projects, because there's all these, the European, there was a project before Fab City called Reflow that used ValueFlows. So it was circular economy with 6 pilot municipalities, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that whole set. And then some other similar technology ones in what's called the Fediverse, or people often know it as Mastodon, but Mastodon doesn't use ValueFlows, but there's a couple, 3 projects there that are adding economic activity to the existing social networking that happens there. And then there's a whole batch of projects, and I think Tibby would include Sensorica in this, that are looking to use Holochain. So there's a project that created a ValueFlows backend in Holochain, and then there's several projects that are looking for funding and trying to add the front end to that backend. So, and Holochain is progressing. It's a little bit more bleeding edge than most stuff, so it takes a little longer. But so yeah, that's the kind of stuff that's out there. Did that help, Barbara? I can ship you some links at some point.
Yeah. Maybe we can add them to the pad. There are a couple of other hands that are raised.
Yeah, I saw James and Rob, you had yours up earlier, but James, do you want to go ahead?
I was just going to ask, in a recipe, how do you connect to facilities? So in the context of making a apple pie, presumably you need a kitchen.
Yep.
But I didn't see it marked on the sort of display you were showing of that.
Yeah. So that would be another, like you might have seen, use an oven and consume ingredients. So you would also use a kitchen. So a kitchen would be a resource and you would have access to that data, and you could say, yeah, I plan on using this kitchen for, Friday morning. And then you could say, yeah, I did use this kitchen on Friday morning. So it's just another flow, another event, or another commitment on the plan layer, or another recipe flow on the recipe layer.
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to parse is what's happening at the plan layer and what's happening at the resource or the recipe layer.
Okay.
And
so
then and then how do you interact between those 2 layers?
So on the recipe layer, you would say, I need this kind of kitchen. Maybe it has certain size, maybe whatever, like it has facilities that you need. You can, like in Tibby's software, you can do this. You can say, here's my recipe, make me a plan, push the button, and it'll generate a plan. The plan will still say, I need this kind of kitchen and this kind of oven, and I need these ingredients, this flour and this. Sometimes the plan has, and then you can tweak the plan like, okay, well, there's a couple things. This isn't what you asked, but since I'm here, it's a cool thing about recipes, and you have this experience with your bill of materials, I think, too. It makes one, or it makes a batch, a logical batch size, or something like that. When you hit that button to make a plan, you can say, the recipe makes 1, and you can say, I want to make 20 of these, and it'll figure that out for you and create that in the plan. And then if you do need a specific piece of equipment or something, or a specific kitchen, you can add that to the plan and say, yes, I need this exact resource as opposed to this type of resource, and it's scheduled then.
I just want to mention, because we experimented with that in Sensorica, sometimes you need to schedule the use of a resource or a lab. It's not always available. Okay, so what we experimented with, so every resource has a page, so it's represented digitally, okay, by a page, and then you have rules about the use of this resource, and in that space you may find a link to schedule the use of resource. You find also information about access. You may need to be trained to access some resource. So from the recipe, I need that from the plan to executing a recipe. You need that real world tasks, right? To schedule and maybe prove your credentials before you access that thing. So there is some stuff in between there that needs to be specified.
James, did that get you far enough down in the layers?
Oh, no, many more questions to be had, but this might not be the format for it. So I'll reach out at another point.
Sure. There's a question in the chat.
Mhm.
Is there a difference between a general and a specific resource, as in, does ValueFlows know the difference? So let me see if this is what you mean, Robin. The resource specification up in the knowledge layer is the general resource. It can be defined very specifically, but it's not, you can't touch it, right? And the resource on the bottom observation layer is touchable, or at least accessible if it's digital, but it lives for real and has a unique identifier and all that kind of stuff. Okay.
I think thank you. I think we're gonna move on to James now to make sure he has enough time, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion too. James Butler is going to be talking a bit about the visual vocabulary of OKF. And rather than me doing a screen share, I'm actually gonna hand screen share over to James, and he's gonna walk us through some of that and keep us within the track of vocabulary. Take it away, James.
Just confirming, are you seeing a mural board that shows templates?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we started with the OK elements of an OKH and an OKW. And this is coming from Helpful Engineering, who was working on, could we generate designs that would be helpful to deal with the crisis of COVID-19? And we took a look at that. We said, okay, that's pretty viable. We need to define these designs in ways that are useful for people to be able to process and deal with to potentially go about making them. And we said, okay, we need to define facilities so we can figure out who could make these things. And then we worked on the concept of, okay, you may need to be able to transport a thing from either a maker facility or some other production facility to a place of use, let's say a hospital in this case. And then we dug into some other elements. We were talking about materials, and this is sort of a base unit, such as something like copper or NWPP or some other very rudimentary production material that you can start from. We looked at contracts and we looked at processes. Now, what I'm showing here are the templates for these things. And we have used the IOP's definition of these as a basis to work from. And we started trying to put some visualizations on those things so people at a glance could understand what those things were. And then we worked, well, I need to go on to my next slide. Let's see. Did that do it? It's not advancing. I don't know why. It did it. Okay, great. So these are instances of, meaning this is a specific OKH. And we again tried to visualize this so that we could have more useful conversations across bounds of intellectual areas. And this little toggle at the top corner implies that this is a specific instance of an OKH or an OKT or some of these others that we are encouraging be put. And then we realized we needed to be able to define stacks of these, because occasionally you have a whole group of them and you need to know that you're sort of working with the aggregate and not the individual. And then we started to try and figure out how we could build things, I think, that are very similar to this concept of value flows. We've called that skis. And it's a specification for interoperability. Take a specific stack of OKHs and examine them for a specific instance of an OKH that you wanted to use. Let's say it's a stack that involves a whole bunch of masks. And then you have some specific requirements that you need of that mask. So you choose a particular mask. Maybe it's an N95 type mask. And then you need a facility that can produce those types of masks and the transport capabilities to move those around. right? And so we would have stacks of these types of things that could do those things. And we could look at how to relate between those. And then we started building up some tools for understanding the state in the construction of a mask. So if you have a mask and it's in the process of being developed, we need to know, okay, where is it along that chain of development? And we started building some tools because we realized in many instances it comes down to a quote or a job. And we came up with this concept called fulfillment plans, which Robert can speak to if he's up to in a minute, and the concepts of platforms, entities who can kind of take on managing the development of fulfillment plans or quotes. And we started developing a few more concepts, which we began to use to look at as we might develop. So an example of that would be, let me go one more slide forward, this. And we are in the process of building a pilot project around this concept set. And this is based off of the idea in Helpful of, trying to figure out how to deliver masks to hospitals that might need to use them. And in this, a user looks at a catalog that's provided by a platform and picks a mask and says, okay, we want to make this specific mask. The engine draws from its stack of OKWs and OKHs and finds that specific design, finds a set of potential manufacturers for that, and asks this service, a fulfillment service, to produce a set of fulfillment plans. A user looks at those fulfillment plans and says, hey, I like this group of companies because maybe they seem very resilient, or maybe they're very cheap. And then a contract is drawn up. This sounds kind of like your plan layer about who's going to make it where, how is it going to get transported, what is the specific OKH that's going to be used in that process. We build that into this fulfillment plan tracking process, right? Which is a contract, and individuals along that contract need to assert that a specific step has been taken. So this step in the assembly process has happened, or this transport step has happened. It's moved from this loading bay to that loading bay, right? And when your full is completed, you'll have a set of green lights going all the way down it saying, yes, 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 right? At the end, the user who is the receiver, in our context, that would be, say, someone in the supply portion of a hospital taking receiving of those objects, right? And these are the visual elements that we've been developing to facilitate these kinds of conversations. And we're open to working at paths to let others use these elements to kind of think and talk about this. And we can talk about ways for putting them in places where people can utilize them. Robert, do you think that's a fairly full statement? Robert Reed has been working on this extensively, and Devery Dickinson, who I think is on this call as well, did a lot of the development work on these visual elements.
Yeah, I think so. The thing that might be missing from what we're presenting here is we have Python code that attempts to match OKHs to OKWs.
Which is this tool right here.
In theory, can sort of model where you are in a fulfillment plan. That is, a fulfillment plan moves from a state of incompleteness to completeness. The rest of this is not really backed by software. And the software for that first part of it is somewhat rudimentary, but it does exist. It's not just a conceptual thing.
Yep, I think that's fair. Yeah, we really have a pilot project that's focused on this portion specifically. And that act is, as Robert was saying, to match a set of OKWs. So effectively matching the resources to the facilities that could make that thing. And even more precisely in statement, we are really looking at the BOM items and the tools needed in the processes. We haven't yet looked at the processes because the processes take capacity and some more complexities that we're trying to avoid for the moment. But we're happy to discuss. Devery, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I guess one thing is this was kind of like a first draft we made of the diagram. James like scrolls over on the Miro board if possible. There's like a final draft that we made that I think will be in the paper that they're submitting to some journals, I guess.
I think it's
So this is like the cleaned up version, which looks a little bit nicer and has like distinguishing colors and some numbers in there to show which step is what.
Yep. We've also begun to use these to kind of dig a little bit further into both the internals of those specific flows, but also we've looked at the breaking scenarios. So what happens when something doesn't get somewhere? And we began to look at, how does that break down and how do we document that? And I think this stuff is quite interesting, and we haven't got as far into it as we'd like, but we're, as the pilot project is starting to come together and actually function, we can actually see those breakdown scenarios begin to happen, which is interesting to observe. I hope that roughly made sense to people. If anybody has questions about it, please speak up.
All right, yeah, we have about, oh, Robin's going to try to reconnect. Yeah, we have about 10 minutes left in the call. So if folks have questions about anything that James just discussed, I know I have a few, but I'll open up to other folks first if there was anything you wanted to ask James or Robert or Divri about. Antonio?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I have a question for both presentations. It's regarding the data. So, because I missed that point. So once we have the standard working, we are collecting data. And we have all these data sets. And it's like, how will you keep the consistency and the process? Because as far as I've been working on the OpenAware standard and all the data has been collected there for different people, one of the main issues is that the completeness of the contributions are different, and the way of describing also the processes and machines change. So one of the main issues that, or challenges, that's a better word for that, is that how to keep the consistency and the taxonomy. Like that's the very important thing, like how to make these things to have a common, more easy to classify language in at the moment of capturing the data. Also, the other is like, have you considered like the amount of data you are what's the term, like specifying in the standards is concerning the ability of people to or the discipline of the people to keep the quality of the data, because the more extensive you have a data form, it's going to lose some quality at some point, because that's what I have observed looking at different data sets. So consistency and quality of the data, how do you keep that on your ways you're working?
Is that question directed at helpful engineering or at ValueFlows?
Both of you. So no.
Lynn, do you want to go first?
Well, I don't know if I got all the questions that you have, but I'll start at the end there. I think like data consistency and quality and completeness is a problem that, okay, Robin can say something too. Like people will do it if they need it. If they need to put data in that helps them coordinate with other people as they're working, that'll happen. If they need to put data in, so that they get paid, that can happen. So I don't know. You can, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that you can make people do some of this. People have to want to for a real reason that helps them or helps their group or helps the ecosystem,
I think, Robert, you were going to answer that too on behalf of.
Yeah, Thank you. So I'm not sure I understood all of the question either, but the helpful engineering team has put a lot of energy into attempting to use Wikidata definitions of tooling in particular, and possibly materials like what is thread, what is scissors, what's a sewing machine, to provide that kind of consistency. I have an opinion that I think is important, although not everyone on my team agrees with this. I think what we're doing here exists to construct human conversations and to facilitate those conversations, rather than to be an end-to-end shopping system where you push a button and you get a pie without ever having spoken to somebody. So, you know, what I imagine the value of ValueFlows, which is very interesting from a kind of circular economy point of view, and the limited work that we've done, which is matching OKHs to OKWs primarily, exists to automatically say, we've had an earthquake, we need this kind of medical device, we need blood supplies, we need food, we need flashlights. Who can produce those things? It's not to get them to order the delivery per se, but to initiate a conversation with the person who can potentially do that. And therefore, I personally believe the problem of data consistency, like what exactly is a flashlight? How bright does it have to be? Is it rechargeable? All that kind of, is essentially never going to be solved completely with computers. It's always going to require a human conversation. But if we can lubricate that human conversation, we will actually be saving lives. And so I think the value of this, speaking for our work, not ValueFlows, which has a different value proposition, it exists primarily in a situation of economic disruption where it's so important to you that you're willing to call someone up on the telephone and ask, you know, are those flashlights going to be acceptable?
Okay, so we've got Robin and then TB. We also just have 3 minutes left. Folks are welcome to stay a couple minutes after if they want, but I'll want to wrap up with a reminder for the next call before we close. Robin, you put your hand down? You still want to? Oh, TB?
Yes, what's going on with Robin? Doesn't have a microphone, or?
The audio just isn't connecting.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for this presentation. I just wanted to, like, we're getting close to the end, just to open the box a little bit and explore beyond. And since I did some work on contracting, we realized a few things. So there are different ways stuff flows to those in need. And what we saw in this presentation is one of them, which is still some hybrid model between the institutional and the decentralized. I was there during COVID, and we were very, very busy working with different groups around the world, developing various things. And the reality was that there was a lot of stuff that was made and got to the doors of hospitals and was refused. So stuff was made, stuff flew to the point where it was supposed to be used. So if we're trying to solve that problem, we're kind of inventing a problem, because that was kind of, that was the reality. Stuff was made in a very decentralized way. Groups like Sensorica with others in collaboration, we designed a lot of stuff, and there were databases of this stuff, and people were printing and delivering. The problem in that case was quality insurance, and that stuff didn't get used because the government stepped in and said, well, this stuff didn't follow the proper channels, and therefore we cannot guarantee that it's not harmful. Okay, so that's another pathway for stuff to get to people in case of an earthquake or some other calamities. So just for us to think in the wider space that, there's various ways things can flow, and ValueFlows can actually address all these kind of ways of stuff to get made and get to the point of use. And maybe when we design stuff, just consider that there's also the totally open and decentralized way of producing and distributing stuff.
Thank you, Tiberius. And then, of course, brings up another conversation thread we can mention when we send out the follow-up after this on the GOSQUAS work, with which Robert is very familiar. I wanted to actually, because we are on the hour before I do the reminder of the next call, I want to hand over the mic to Andrew really quickly.
Thanks. I just want to say a really big thank you to Lynn, to James, and to Devery, Robin, to be, you've all spoken and contributed to the conversation today. And it's, it makes a lot of sense how this fits into the Internet of Production. So thank you for your time in the preparation, but more than anything else, the thinking that you have put into ValueFlows and how it relates to the building of an Internet of Production. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, yes. Well, I want to make sure that you get together with everybody, Robin. Oh, I'm going to go ahead and announce the next call, stop the recording, and then give some other updates if folks can stick around. So this is a reminder of our next community call. I believe it's on Wednesday, March 22nd at 1400 UTC. And that is going to be focusing on some of the research and the work that Tiberius has been doing related to contracts. And so keep your eyes peeled for our save the date